Most people live inside a 2 4-hour window. They wake up thinking about what needs to be done today, what problems need solving, what tasks need finishing before the clock runs out. It feels productive, even responsible, but it quietly traps them in a cycle that never truly moves forward. Because when your thinking is limited to days, your decisions become short-term. You choose what feels urgent instead of what actually builds something meaningful. You react to pressure instead of positioning for growth, and over time, that pattern keeps you busy but not advancing. There is a different way to think, but it doesn't feel natural at first. It stretches beyond the immediate, beyond quick wins, into something slower and far more powerful. And once you begin to see through that lens, your entire relationship with time begins to change. The people who build real wealth, real influence, real control over their lives are not rushing from one result to the next. They are thinking in years. They are making decisions today that will only fully reveal themselves far into the future. And that's what makes it difficult for most people to understand. Because when results are delayed, it feels like nothing is happening. It feels like effort without reward. And in that silence, most people quit believing they've made the wrong move. But what if that silence is actually the process working? What if the lack of immediate results is not failure, but a sign that you're finally playing a different game? One that doesn't reward impatience, but multiplies consistency over time. Think about how often you've started something with excitement, only to lose momentum when progress slowed down. Not because the path was wrong, but because the results didn't come fast enough to keep you convinced. That's the trap of short-term thinking. It conditions you to expect quick feedback, quick validation, quick proof that what you're doing is working. And when that proof doesn't appear, doubt begins to take over and action fades. But the most powerful outcomes don't operate on that timeline. They grow quietly, beneath the surface, long before they become visible. And if you don't understand that, you'll walk away from something valuable just before it begins to take shape. There is a discipline in patience that most people never develop. Not passive waiting, but active persistence. The ability to keep moving forward without needing constant confirmation. To trust the direction, even when the results are not immediate, and that discipline creates separation. While others jump from one opportunity to another, chasing faster results, you remain steady. You continue building, refining, improving, while time itself begins to work in your favor. Because time is not neutral. It either works against you or for you, depending on how you use it. If you're constantly resetting, starting over, chasing the next quick win, time works against you. But if you stay consistent, it begins to compound your efforts. That's when things start to shift. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but undeniably. What once felt slow begins to accelerate. What once seemed small begins to expand. And the results you were waiting for start to appear all at once. To someone thinking in days, it looks like luck, like sudden success. But to someone thinking in years, it's expected. It's the natural outcome of staying with something long enough for it to grow beyond the early stages. This is where most people misjudge the process. They compare their early efforts to someone else's late results, not realizing the time gap in between. They see the outcome, but not the years of unseen consistency behind it. And because of that, they underestimate what's required. They underestimate how long they need to stay committed, how patient they need to become, how steady they need to remain when nothing seems to be happening. But once you understand this, your mindset changes. You stop measuring progress daily and start measuring direction. You stop asking, "What did I gain today?" and start asking, "Am I still moving towards something greater?" That question alone removes pressure. It removes the need for immediate results and replaces it with something stronger: clarity. A sense that as long as you stay aligned with your path, the results will come in their own time. And when you operate from that place, your actions become more deliberate, more focused. You're no longer reacting to short-term outcomes, but building something that can withstand time itself. That's when patience stops feeling like a weakness and starts becoming your greatest advantage. Because while others are quitting, restarting, losing momentum, you are still there, still building, still moving forward. And over time, that consistency becomes impossible to compete with. Not because you're moving faster, but because you never stopped. Because you allowed time to multiply your efforts instead of resetting them. So the real question is not how quickly you can achieve something, but how long you are willing to stay committed to it. Because that answer will determine everything that follows. What you're about to hear will challenge the way you think about progress, success, and time itself. It will stretch your perspective beyond the daily cycle into something much bigger, something most people never fully grasp. And once you see it clearly, you won't be able to return to thinking in days, because you'll understand that your future is not built in moments, but in the years you're willing to stay the course. There is a condition so common that it is rarely questioned, yet it shapes the direction of nearly every man who lives within it. It is not imposed from the outside. It is accepted gradually, through habit, through repetition, through the quiet structure of daily living. A man awakens, considers what must be done before the day ends, and proceeds accordingly. This appears responsible. It appears productive, yet it contains a limitation that is seldom recognized. If I were to begin again, I would not look first at how much I am doing, but at the span within which I am thinking. For a man may act continuously, yet remain confined. He may complete many tasks, yet advance very little. And this is not due to lack of effort, it is due to the narrowness of his mental horizon. There is a tendency to measure progress by what is accomplished within a single day. A man asks himself, "What have I finished? What remains? What must be done before tomorrow?" These questions guide his actions. They create movement, yet they do not necessarily create direction. If I were beginning again, I would question these measures. For what is completed today may have little bearing on what is built over time. There is also the illusion of urgency. Many tasks appear important because they demand attention immediately. They press upon the mind. They create a sense of necessity. And in responding to them, a man feels engaged, active, productive. Yet urgency is not always importance, and what is urgent often prevents what is significant. If I were beginning again, I would separate these two clearly. For what builds a man's future rarely demands immediate attention. It requires deliberate attention. There are many who live within this narrow window of a single day. They rise, they respond, they complete, they rest, and then they repeat. Their days are filled. Their effort is consistent. Yet their position remains largely unchanged, not because they lack ability, but because their thinking has not extended beyond the immediate. If I were beginning again, I would expand this window. For a man cannot build what he does not consider beyond the present. There is also the quiet reinforcement of this pattern through environment. A man observes others who move in the same way. They speak of daily responsibilities. They measure success by immediate completion. And because this is common, it is accepted as sufficient. If I were beginning again, I would not confuse what is common with what is effective. For what is common often maintains but does not elevate. There is also the difference between movement and construction. Movement fills time. It creates activity. It produces visible effort. But construction requires direction. It requires thought beyond the present. It requires actions that may not produce immediate result but lead to something greater. If I were beginning again, I would not seek movement alone. I would seek construction. There is also the example of men who stepped beyond this limitation. Henry Ford did not confine his thinking to daily output. He did not measure his progress by what was completed within a single day. He considered systems. He considered processes. He thought beyond immediate tasks and into enduring structure. And in doing so, he produced something that extended far beyond daily effort. If I were beginning again, I would study this approach carefully. There is also the effect this narrow thinking has upon decision. A man who thinks only in days chooses what resolves quickly. He avoids what requires time. He seeks completion rather than development, and in doing so, he builds a pattern of short results. If I were beginning again, I would choose differently. I would ask not what resolves today, but what contributes over time. There is also the pressure that comes from daily measurement. A man who evaluates himself each day may feel insufficient when results are not immediate. He may question his direction. He may alter his course. And in doing so, he disrupts the very process that requires continuity. If I were beginning again, I would reduce this pressure. I would not measure daily. I would observe direction. There is also the hidden cost of constant reaction. A man who responds to each demand as it appears does not guide his path. He follows what is presented. His time is directed by circumstance, not by intention. And over time, this produces a life that is active but not designed. If I were beginning again, I would take control of direction. For direction, once established, guides action more effectively than reaction. There is also the perception of others. A man who lives within daily thinking appears busy. He is seen as responsible, as engaged, as consistent, yet he is not seen as one who builds something beyond his immediate actions. His effort is recognized, but his direction is not. If I were beginning again, I would not seek to appear active. I would seek to become directed. There is also the gradual realization that must occur. A man must see that his daily actions, while necessary, are not sufficient. He must understand that without a broader view, his effort will continue to produce only what it has always produced. And this realization does not come through effort, it comes through awareness. If I were beginning again, I would cultivate this awareness deliberately. There is also the compounding effect of narrow thinking. Each day reinforces the next. Each cycle strengthens the pattern. until eventually the man no longer questions it. It becomes his way of operating, his natural approach, his accepted method. If I were beginning again, I would interrupt this pattern early. There is also a transformation that occurs when this limitation is removed. A man begins to think beyond today. He considers what his actions will produce over time. He becomes less concerned with immediate completion and more concerned with lasting result. And in this shift, his actions begin to change. If I were beginning again, I would allow this transformation to guide me. There is also the emergence of a different kind of calm. A man who is no longer confined to daily thinking does not rush in the same way. He does not react to every demand. He moves with purpose, with clarity, with direction that extends beyond the present moment. If I were beginning again, I would build this condition. There is also a final realization. A man who thinks only in days may remain active his entire life, yet never advance beyond his current position. But a man who expands his thinking beyond the present begins to build something that continues, grows, and compounds. If I were to express this as instruction, I would say, do not confine your thinking to what must be done today. Consider what must be built over time. Let this be fixed firmly within. I act with direction. I build beyond the present. I do not remain within the narrow window of today. Repeat this not as encouragement, but as awareness. Thus, if I were to begin again from nothing, I would begin here. I would expand my thinking beyond the day. I would direct my actions towards something that endures. And in doing so, I would move beyond the condition of constant activity without advancement into one of deliberate construction, where each action contributes not only to the present, but to a future that is shaped through consistent direction applied over time. Having understood that many men live confined within the narrow span of a single day, the next principle, if I were to begin again, is to recognize the deeper cause that holds them there. It is not lack of effort, it is not lack of intention. It is the expectation of immediate result. A man begins something with energy. He acts, he applies himself. Yet he looks quickly for evidence that his effort is working. And when that evidence does not appear at once, something begins to change within him. Doubt. If I were beginning again, I would not look for immediate confirmation. For what is built with permanence is rarely visible in its early stages. There is a misunderstanding that must be corrected. A man believes that progress must be seen to be real, that results must appear quickly to be valid. Yet this belief confines him to short cycles. For anything that requires time appears unproductive in the beginning. If I were beginning again, I would separate visibility from reality, for what is unseen may still be growing. There is also the quiet stage of construction that most men abandon. A man begins, then waits. He looks for change. He measures early. And when he does not see immediate return, he withdraws. Not because the path is wrong, but because the result has not yet appeared. If I were beginning again, I would remain in this stage, for it is the most critical. There are many who have stood at the edge of progress without knowing it. They have applied effort long enough for something to begin forming beneath the surface. Yet just before it becomes visible, they stop. They turn away. They begin again elsewhere. and in doing so, they return to the beginning repeatedly. If I were beginning again, I would not leave what is unseen. I would continue. There is also the nature of growth itself. It does not announce its beginning. It develops quietly. It forms structure before it produces result. It builds strength before it reveals outcome. And because this process is not visible, it is often misunderstood. If I were beginning again, I would trust what is forming beyond my sight. There is also the difference between those who persist and those who withdraw. The first continues despite the absence of visible result. He builds, he refines, he remains steady. The second seeks confirmation. He requires evidence, and when it does not appear, he changes direction. Over time, their paths separate. If I were beginning again, I would choose persistence over confirmation. There is also the example of men who understood this principle clearly. Thomas Edison did not measure his progress by immediate success. He continued through repeated attempts, through unseen adjustments, through effort that produced no immediate result. Yet each attempt contributed to what would eventually become visible. His work was not wasted, it was accumulating. If I were beginning again, I would adopt this view. There is also the emotional discomfort that arises in this stage. A man may feel uncertainty. He may question his direction. He may wonder whether his effort is misplaced. These feelings are natural. They arise when the mind seeks proof that has not yet appeared. If I were beginning again, I would not allow these feelings to dictate my action. For feeling is temporary, direction must remain. There is also the discipline required to continue without validation. This discipline is not forceful. It is steady. It is quiet. It does not demand constant energy. It requires consistency. The ability to act again and again without needing immediate return. If I were beginning again, I would build this discipline. There is also the compounding effect of unseen effort. Each action contributes to the next. Each repetition adds to what has already been formed. And though this accumulation is not visible at first, it grows steadily until eventually it becomes undeniable. If I were beginning again, I would remain long enough to reach this point. There is also the perception of others. A man who continues without visible result may appear uncertain to those who do not understand his direction. They may question him. They may doubt him, for they measure progress by what they can see. Yet when results appear, their perception changes. If I were beginning again, I would not rely upon external validation. I would rely upon internal direction. There is also the contrast of those who require immediate return. They begin many things. They move quickly from one effort to another. They seek rapid gain. Yet because they do not remain, they do not accumulate. And without accumulation, growth does not occur. If I were beginning again, I would not move in this manner. There is also the gradual strengthening of belief that comes from persistence. A man who continues begins to trust his direction. He no longer questions as often. He becomes more certain not because results have appeared, but because he has remained. If I were beginning again, I would build this trust through continuation. There is also the transformation of expectation. A man who once required immediate result begins to expect delay, not as failure, but as part of the process. He understands that what is being built requires time. And in this understanding, he becomes patient, not passively, but actively. If I were beginning again, I would develop this expectation. There is also the emergence of a different form of confidence. Not the confidence that comes from quick success, but the confidence that comes from steady effort. A man knows he will continue. He knows he will remain. And in this knowing, he becomes stable. If I were beginning again, I would value this stability. There is also a final realization. The most valuable outcomes are not immediate. They are constructed. And construction requires time, repetition, and the willingness to remain when nothing appears to be happening. If I were to express this as instruction, I would say, continue your effort beyond the point where results are visible. Let this be fixed firmly within. I build without needing proof. I continue without interruption. I trust what is forming. Repeat this not as encouragement, but as discipline. Thus, if I were to begin again from nothing, having expanded my thinking beyond the day, I would do this next. I would remain in the unseen stage. I would continue when results are not visible. And in doing so, I would allow accumulation to occur quietly, steadily, until what I have built beneath the surface begins to appear, not suddenly, but as the natural result of effort that was never abandoned before its time. Having understood that true progress often remains unseen in its early stages, the next principle, if I were to begin again, is to examine how a man measures his movement. For measurement determines perception, and perception directs behavior. A man who measures incorrectly will misjudge his progress, no matter how faithfully he acts. There is a common habit of measuring each day as though it must justify itself. A man asks, "What did I gain today? What did I complete? What has changed?" These questions appear practical, yet they create a narrow frame, for they require immediate evidence, and when such evidence is absent, they produce doubt. If I were beginning again, I would change this measurement. Not what I do, but how I evaluate it. There is also the pressure created by daily judgment. A man who expects each day to produce visible progress becomes unsettled when it does not. He questions his direction. He considers altering his course, and in doing so, he interrupts the very process that requires continuity. If I were beginning again, I would remove this pressure. For pressure applied too early distorts perception. There is also the distinction between speed and direction. A man may move quickly, completing many tasks, yet if those tasks do not align with a greater aim, his speed produces no lasting advancement. Another man may move more slowly, yet with clear direction, and over time his position surpasses the first. If I were beginning again, I would not pursue speed alone. I would pursue alignment. There is also the shift from asking, "What has changed today?" to asking, "Am I still moving toward what I have chosen?" This question does not demand immediate result. It requires only that direction remains consistent. And when direction remains consistent, results follow in time. If I were beginning again, I would ask this question daily. There is also the nature of long-range thinking. It extends beyond the present moment. It considers not only what is being done, but what it will become. It allows a man to act without needing constant confirmation. And in this, it removes much of the uncertainty that disrupts progress. If I were beginning again, I would adopt this perspective fully, There is also the contrast between two men. One measures each day. He seeks proof. He reacts when proof is absent. The other measures direction. He observes his path. He continues, regardless of immediate outcome. Over time, their results diverge, not because one worked harder, but because one remained aligned. If I were beginning again, I would become the latter. There is also the example of men who have applied this principle. A man such as John D. Rockefeller did not measure his success by daily return. He directed his efforts over long periods. He allowed his decisions to unfold over time, and in doing so, he built something that could not have been created through short measurement. If I were beginning again, I would study this approach. There is also the calming effect of long-range thinking. A man who is no longer confined to daily results does not react in the same manner. He does not feel compelled to change direction with each fluctuation. He becomes steady, deliberate, controlled. If I were beginning again, I would build this steadiness. There is also the removal of emotional fluctuation. A man who measures daily experiences frequent highs and lows. He is encouraged by small gains and discouraged by temporary absence. Yet a man who measures direction remains stable. He does not rise and fall with each day, he continues. If I were beginning again, I would reduce these fluctuations. There is also the strengthening of patience. Not passive waiting, but active continuation. A man understands that his actions are contributing to something that requires time. He does not rush. He does not force. He proceeds with confidence that comes from alignment. If I were beginning again, I would cultivate this patience. There is also the effect upon decision-making. A man who thinks in days chooses what resolves quickly. A man who thinks in years chooses what builds gradually. His decisions reflect his perspective. And because his perspective is extended, his results are extended. If I were beginning again, I would choose accordingly. There is also the perception of others. A man who acts with long-range direction appears different. He does not rush unnecessarily. He does not react impulsively. He moves with purpose. Others may not understand his pace at first, yet over time they recognize its effectiveness. If I were beginning again, I would not seek to appear fast, I would become directed. There is also the compounding effect of direction. Each action taken in alignment contributes to the next. There is no interruption, no restarting, no fragmentation. And because of this continuity, progress accumulates steadily. If I were beginning again, I would preserve this continuity. There is also the transformation of identity that occurs. A man no longer sees himself as one who completes tasks. He sees himself as one who builds. His thinking expands. His actions reflect this expansion. And in time, his results confirm it. If I were beginning again, I would allow this identity to form. There is also the removal of urgency where it is unnecessary. A man who thinks in days feels constant pressure to complete. A man who thinks in years understands that not all progress is immediate. He directs his effort without rushing his result. If I were beginning again, I would release unnecessary urgency. There is also a final realization. Time, when measured in days, creates pressure. But time, when directed in years, creates power. For it allows effort to accumulate, to expand, and to produce results that cannot be achieved within a narrow frame. If I were to express this as instruction, I would say, do not measure your progress by the day, measure it by your direction. Let this be fixed firmly within. I move with purpose. I build over time. I remain aligned with what I have chosen. Repeat this not as encouragement, but as perspective. Thus, if I were to begin again from nothing, having learned to continue without immediate result, I would do this next. I would change how I measure my progress. I would no longer confine myself to daily judgment. I would direct my actions toward a longer horizon, and in doing so, I would remove the pressure that once caused me to question, allowing me instead to continue steadily until time itself begins to reflect the direction I have chosen, and my results become the natural outcome of effort applied consistently, without interruption, across a span that extends far beyond the limits of a single day. Having learned to measure progress by direction rather than by the day, the next principle, if I were to begin again, is to understand what occurs when effort is not interrupted. For there is a force at work, quiet and often unnoticed, that transforms ordinary action into extraordinary result, but only for the man who remains. This force is accumulation, and accumulation, when sustained over time, becomes compounding. If I were beginning again, I would not seek rapid increase. I would seek uninterrupted continuation. For it is not intensity alone that produces great outcome, it is repetition applied without withdrawal. There is a misunderstanding that must be corrected. A man believes that each effort stands alone, that what he does today is separate from what he did yesterday. Yet this is not so. Each action contributes to the next. Each step builds upon what has already been formed. And when this process is allowed to continue, something begins to multiply. If I were beginning again, I would treat each action as part of a greater accumulation. There is also the nature of compounding itself. It does not appear immediately. In its early stages, progress seems slow. A man may act repeatedly and see little visible change, and because of this, he may believe that his effort is not producing significant result. Yet beneath the surface, something is forming, something is building. If I were beginning again, I would trust this unseen accumulation. There are many who begin with strong intention. They act consistently for a time. Yet when results do not appear quickly, they withdraw, they pause, they redirect, and in doing so, they interrupt accumulation. What they have built begins to weaken. What could have multiplied is reset. If I were beginning again, I would not interrupt this process. For interruption is the greatest enemy of compounding. There is also the contrast of the man who remains. He does not see immediate reward, yet he continues. He repeats. He allows his actions to build upon one another, and though his progress may appear modest at first, it begins to accelerate over time, not suddenly, but steadily. If I were beginning again, I would become this man. There is also the example of those who have applied this principle clearly. Many who appear to have achieved sudden success have in truth been accumulating for years. Their effort was not visible in its early stages. Their results were not immediate, yet they remained. And because they remained, their results eventually multiplied. If I were beginning again, I would understand that what appears sudden is often the result of long accumulation. There is also the effect of repetition upon strength. A single action has limited influence, but repeated action gains force. It becomes more efficient, more refined, more effective. And as this continues, the result increases without requiring equal increase in effort. If I were beginning again, I would allow repetition to strengthen my action. There is also the role of patience in this process. Not passive waiting, but active continuation. A man must continue long enough for accumulation to take effect. He must remain beyond the point where others withdraw, for it is at this point that separation occurs. If I were beginning again, I would remain. There is also the compounding of knowledge. A man who continues learns. He refines his method. He improves his execution. Each repetition is not identical, it is enhanced. And in this enhancement, his results increase further. If I were beginning again, I would build not only action but understanding. There is also the perception of others. A man who remains may appear unchanged in the beginning. His progress may not be visible. Others may overlook his effort. Yet when accumulation reaches a certain point, his results begin to appear rapidly. And at that moment, perception changes. What was once unnoticed becomes recognized. If I were beginning again, I would not depend upon early recognition